Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm Sally Munro with Century 21 Platinum Realty, and it's been quite interesting. I can't believe it's already Thursday, but we're always thankful to get to Thursday. And today, of course, our subject matter is probably a little more serious, but I know we're all going to learn something new. So today joining me, of course, is our regular, and we love Leonardo DST from the Scotiabank. And so Leonardo is with us. Hello, let's just say hello. Hi, Leo, how are you?
Hey, Sally, how's it going today?
Oh my gosh, you're looking more handsome than ever. I mean, COVID is obviously doing some positive things for you.
Thank you very much. It's always nice to get a compliment.
Well, it's nice to see you here, but we have an interesting topic. We're talking about money and the law today. So I have joining us Tammy Cameron of Cameron and Cameron. Tammy and Ian are partners and also husband and wife. They met in law school and they've been practicing law in our community for 30 years. So they specialize in every aspect of law, from real estate litigation, but one of Tammy's area of expertise is family law. So help me welcome Tammy Cameron. Tammy.
Hi,
welcome.
Sally.
Thank you so much
Tammy.
for joining us today. Of course, this is Leonardo DST. I told you he'd be joining us. He's with the Scotiabank, and he's our go-to investment guy. He brings us up to speed on what's happening on the stock market. But today, one of my serious questions, and is really about investments, and it's about family law, and it's about division of things. And Leo, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask Tammy a question. She can tell us. I haven't seen her in months and months and months, and I wanted her to tell us what's been going on. First of all, if you don't mind, Tammy, say hi. There you go.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on to chat. This is my first podcast, so I'm feeling like a little bit of a superstar.
You are.
So my assistant said I should make sure that I hit a whole bunch of buzzwords like unprecedented times and economic uncertainty and the new normal, and balance that off with, hope, growth, renewal. And so now that I've done that, I don't think that anybody knows which side they're on. And every day you're feeling economic uncertainty, and then the next day you're feeling hopeful because you got dressed and you're out of the jams. I want to start with sort of what the judicial system has done in family law to respond to a complete shutdown. So we were scheduled right up through until September on matters because it's a slow process. And when we got the shutdown, it was on a Thursday that everything from Friday forward on the 20th of March now doesn't exist. You're up in a cloud. And people started to fall into groups in family law. There was the Get It Done group. So some of the people who had expected to settle or have a trial date or meetings set up for September, they didn't wait. Those deals were done before a month had completed because they were realistic in what their timelines were, and they just wanted it to be finished. The other group was never is it going to be done, where conversations were being had about, well, your kid is 4 now. By the time you litigate, by the time you do the things with children, it might be 18 months. And by then, your concerns are going to be different. So is this a litigation emergency, or is it something that's going to age out? And that's something that family practitioners never spoke of before. We never would say, well, here's a file that simply is going to have to resolve itself with time. So in balancing that time, energy, and money, the people who want to start fresh are doing it. They're still buying and selling houses. There's a bit of a scare from a rental property perspective. So a number of rental properties went up on the market during this COVID period of time in my practice. The court system itself now is dealing with emergencies. What is an emergency seems to fall sadly silence and emergency protection orders. There was about 1,100 protection orders that were granted by the court in the last 90 days, which is just to give you an idea of that have actually made applications feeling that they're in an emergency situation that requires a protective order. So the alternate dispute resolution has become a good way to deal with things. You don't have to rely on the government to give you an answer. You can take your clients outside of the litigation process. We have an arbitration act that allows people to say, okay, we would respect a judge's decision. Instead, we're going to hire privately a senior lawyer. That's going to be our judge. And we're going to contractually be bound by that decision to allow people to move on. Because really, if you're waiting for a judge to make a decision for you, you're 18 months out if you start. Let's see. So anyways, I guess we're open to change. Going back to the hope, growth, and renewal, people are signing deals on the hood of their Honda if they don't want to come into the office, if they don't want you coming into their home. Right at the start of this, at the end of March, there was a big boom in our practice with medical people in general wanting to make sure their personal directives and wills were up to date and done, because their anxiety levels going into this unprecedented times were much higher than just, everybody should have a will. So at one point we had our own pens and we had witnesses and we were all 6 feet apart signing on the hood of a client's Honda. So
Really?
We're open to change. I don't know what brick and mortar is going to look like in the future, if big firms are going to be able to keep going. But our boutique family practice, I expect will be picking up when people are more comfortable to move forward. So Leonardo was asking me before we went live about what to do with property. From his perspective, he's got a set of investments and clients that want to sort of dismantle, and how do you start that approach? So if you think of matrimonial property as a box, what was acquired during the time of your marriage as your matrimonial pot that you're dividing. There are some things that are outside the pot, and those are called exemptions, and there's 4 of them. And as an aside, this now applies to couples that are not married as well as couples that are married. There was a legislative change that started in January of this year. And so now matrimonial property is not just marriage property. So let's talk about it as during the time of the relationship. Okay. So the things that are exempt from the assumption of a 50-50 split are anything, any assets that you had prior to the start of the relationship, assets that are inherited, any money that you would receive from a body injury, like a car accident or a workers' compensation claim, or any gifts from third parties. So if you gave it to each other, it's still in the pot. But if you won a bowling trophy, or somebody from work gave you a television, those kinds of gifts from third parties.
What about a lottery win?
Well, a lottery win doesn't fall into any of those categories, so it starts in the pot, okay? Now, the way you stop the pot from continuing, because often people separate and they're not at the point where they've got an agreement in place right away, is to start first by trying to agree on what your separation date is. And I say that because the law also acknowledges that people might split up and not be able to move out right away. So if somebody's in the basement and you're not interacting as a married couple, which is going to the Christmas party together, which is doing each other's laundry, which is having meals together, those are the indicia of being together. But when you're only having hallway sex, you know that you're living separate and apart. But that's your date of separation. And that's relevant to how you get divorced, but it's not relevant to the division of matrimonial property. And sometimes when we're talking about investments, people say, well, what is our date? Well, the date is the day you agree to value your property, or the day that a judge does that for you. in these times, it becomes really an important decision because investments, if we're going to go with a 25% drop across the board as sort of a rule of thumb to look at, even if you split up before March of 2020 and you had an agreement that said something like, the husband is going to maintain the investments and cash out the wife at this dollar value, you may be stuck with that, even though this dollar value no longer represents 50% because you've signed a deal that now needs to be effective. I got a bit off track. So let's go back to the four things that were outside.
May have fallen. Is this what we're saying? The investments have devalued since March. Okay. Sorry, just clarifying.
So when I say the matrimonial pot being valued at 50%, the upside is, yes, the lottery winnings would be in there, and the downside is both parties are subject to the loss. Even if it's a non-registered investment that's only in one person's name, it's still part and parcel of what was acquired during the relationship.
Unless it's been determined what the value was and there was an agreement prior to COVID.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yes. Okay. Yes. And remember too, that if you had $100,000 prior to the commencement of the relationship, and that money is now worth $150,000, the gain was acquired during the relationship and the gain would be divided after taxes. However, if you had $100,000 before the relationship because you moved in after the New Year's party, and now you're only worth $75,000, there is no sharing of the loss. Okay. So my advice to people is call me before you need me. Call me before you move in so that it can be worked out. If you're coming in with very little for assets, then you're going to be treated like a marriage. But to truly protect losses or gains, you do need to have an agreement in place.
Mm-hmm.
Married or not married.
A question like with Leonardo, who's in the investment side of things, right? So there are TSFA accounts, there are RSP accounts, there's all of these things. So all these things are part of the pot. Any of this exempt, Leonardo?
Well, what would be exempt would be, yeah, it would all be part of the pot unless it was acquired before the relationship commenced, is my understanding.
Mm-hmm. So now, go ahead.
One of the situations I run into often when I'm planning, usually people come to me when there's a big change in their life. So they start looking at retirement. Sometimes, like you mentioned, investments go down, so they're questioning their investment strategy to begin with. Children, marriages, divorces, and I often see a lot of pension statements of separated pensions because that's how it works. One of the questions that might be challenging, and it started, I've had 3 conversations in the last few weeks, is with issues regarding a separation with property acquired during the separation where there's a net loss on a property, but one person can't qualify for that. What's usually, and the reason I'm asking you this is because, well, usually with the investment side, this is more of a legal question, so I'm just taking advantage that you're here.
Okay, so remember, if you have an agreement that's in place there's 2 requirements. You can't just sit down at your kitchen table and do an agreement between a husband and a wife and say, here's our agreement. That's an example of your agreement, but to have a proper agreement, the legislation says you have to have 2 things. Disclosure, meaning you know what your assets are, you know what your debts are, you know what your value is, and independent legal. So you must have a lawyer separate and apart. The spouses have their own lawyers to go through what the consequences of the agreement are. So once you have a formal agreement, then that's what you're bound by, period. So if there's a bad formula in your agreement and the loss follows an asset that is one party's, the agreement is going to be applied. For the losses coming forward, it's a little bit of a hot shot when, again, we go back to what the people can agree on. That's, I think, what most people are looking for is some certainty. They come to me, they come to you, they say, give me some options. What's our best way of? If we can only do it this way and these are the consequences, how do we adjust, the assets to try to get to an equal division of the equity? But if the people can't come to an agreement, the sad thing is the judge is going to say, sell it, apply your equity to any outstanding debts, and divide your obligations equally. That's that assumption. Again, it's on the pro side. It doesn't matter if the pension is in her name alone. He still has an interest in it for the amount of that pension that was acquired during the relationship. So it's not about who owns it, who wanted it, who bought it. It's about equality. So if you don't find a way to get there using the professionals around you, a judge is not going to be attached to property. They're going to order a sale, which will establish its fair market value, and divide any consequences after taxes, etc., equally between the people. So
you're saying if they don't come to some agreement, is that typically the judge's position?
Yes.
Dispense with it, divide by 2, net,
Yep.
whatever the net is. Wow.
That's right. Yeah, the business of property, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in planning some things, so if you're watching for things, or you're having the advantage of an organized, cooperative couple, they may be wanting to sell their matrimonial home that's in joint names. So they both move out. They now each have their own residence. They then sell the matrimonial home. There's going to be some gains. There's going to be some tax consequences because it's not their primary residence anymore. So those are the kinds of things that, call me before you need me, is to try to avoid some of that. And again, like you said, how is it best to place those losses?
Can you avoid that by establishing that it was the primary residence and establishing a value to it? Is that how we circumvent the capital gains? Or are we talking about they've decided, well, we're moving out, we're renting that, and we'll let the chips fall where they may?
Well, as soon as they've rented it, they've changed it from a primary residence, and you can't really do much about it being an income generating property. But a lot of it depends on how long it stayed on the market, what was the work that was done in between. But it's in the planning of things, couples that have both, say, a home in the city and a country home. And so the lake lot's in joint names, the house is in joint names. They're going to get a divorce. How do you go through who's keeping what before it's sold? And that might be a situation where one keeps one property, one keeps another. And when they're sold, they both would be able to avoid the capital gains because one property is owned by one person, not two properties by both people.
Interesting. So when it comes to, investments that couples have, for example, with Leo at the Scotiabank, and they're faced with this particular challenge where, we've seen the fluctuation in markets, right? Everybody saw it plummeted right back, whoa. Would it be in the client's best interest to discuss and decide that we'll leave those they're 50-50, but leave that particular asset in place and allow it to, because panic selling means that everybody loses, no?
Well, the advantage of any kind of a market-linked investment is that typically you can transfer it in kind. So when we're talking about properties, you can't just split a property and take half of it to Leduc and the other half to St. Albert. But you can do this with typically you can do this with holdings like the ones discussed. So if you were, it makes sense probably to not sell anything, especially in a panic during a downward market. So to your point, what would make sense is you proceed with a split as prescribed by the courts or the separation agreement, and then transfer those assets in kind, and whatever those may be, and then a decision can be made with the individual that that has that has transferred those investments over.
Tammy, what would you recommend? Do you often think that it's best that people attempt to settle it all and go their separate ways, or is it prudent in these times to look at what should be done and have it all in writing?
Well, I think having it all in writing is a good idea, even if it's a long economic plan. Just because you're not married anymore doesn't mean that you can't keep that house in joint names. But how is that house going to be handled when someone dies? What's your estate planning? Again, there's nothing that limits what can be contained in a separation agreement. So there's no restrictions on maintaining an asset for a long time. But when people are getting divorced, chances are they're not great business partners either, and they're looking to blend a family often. And so in a situation where, and one of the growth areas, by the way, is seniors getting divorced, and these are marriages that are often longer than 40 years, and at that point they may be a little bit more open to a combined lira, that they each get the same amount of money out of each month.
The investments, true.
Exactly. And again, if you have enough money to accommodate everybody's needs, you can be a little bit more creative and people are a bit more open. But for the most part, people want a clean break. And part of that is the shorter the marriage, the younger the couple, the more important it is to try to get that clean break instead of having a potential 30-year investment that they have to hang on to, like a pension. So on pensions, there's
thought about these long-term marriages. Wow. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So for things like pensions, making a decision about keeping everybody's pension intact or dividing everybody's pension in half. So often people can't afford to buy out their spouse's pension. So we would send the pension information to an accountant. The actuarial study would be done and would say, today, your interest in the firefighter's pension is X number of dollars. And if you get it today, you don't have to wait for 10 years for him to retire. We discount it for the taxes. We discount it for getting the money today in a lump sum and not having to wait and then get it monthly. So there's calculations that are a bit out of my wheelhouse on that one. We do pay to have an actuary do that. But then the firefighter has an option. Do you want to cash out your spouse's interest in the pension now and keep the pension? Or do we just want to divide the pension at source? And if you're dividing the pension at source, it's not 1/2 of the pension forever. It's 1/2 of what was acquired during the course of the relationship. So it might be 1/2 of 8 years out of 12 years that he was a firefighter, right? So back to one of the reasons why independent legal and good disclosure is important is to understand what your cash flow looks like. If somebody wants to buy a house coming out of a marriage, they may give up their future pension entitlement to have that lump sum now for a down payment.
Whoa. It's complicated, Leo. So, I hadn't thought about these long-term relationships, right? 40 years is a long time. And, I'm not sure if you're receiving or if your call volume has gone up, Ms. Cameron, but I would tend to think that people lock down for over 2 months in a 24/7 situation, that perhaps maybe they're finally having that 45-year discussion. Ouch. Do you see this situation like COVID? Do you see a lot more? I know you mentioned earlier that there was 1,100 application for sort of protective orders, but I'm talking about in terms where a couple have decided, you know what? Listen, life is a 12-inch ruler. I don't think we like each other anymore. Why don't we just, you seeing more of this?
For the people that want to get it done, yes. What I'm getting is, here's our kitchen table agreement. Start putting it into the format of a binding agreement, because we're sophisticated about our assets. We understand the disclosure component to it, and we don't want to be considered a family unit or a cohort group during a quarantine time. Yeah.
Men that people who have been quarantined together and have seen their way, they're thinking, okay, I don't see my future with you, that perhaps maybe they give it a bit of time.
A lot of people are scared. They just don't know if they're going back to jobs, if they want to go back to jobs. There's a difference between a discussion on a family file where the division of assets at a high income level, the priorities on that file with the client is different than, you don't know if you're going back to a retail job, and you don't know if you want to go back to a minimum wage job when you're actually now probably better in a cash flow position, using some of the government programs that will be available even when we're fully open. So people who don't like each other, that they've just discovered that they really don't like each other. And sadly, they often have children. That's the other thing too, is they don't have the option of saying, okay, well, I'm going to go and be economically self-sufficient because my daycare might open next week. So is my phone ringing? Not as much as I would like it to be. Of course, real estate is down, and there was the little, like I said, the first sort of wave of wills and estate planning at the start of this. But everybody's open, everybody's open. If you have kids, make sure that you take parenting after separation. There's a mandatory course. If you have children that are under 16, you can take it online. You can't book a course date. You can't even stand in line unless you've taken parenting after separation. So do that and get your income tax returns together and list your assets and look on Kijiji to find out what your boat is worth and get your paperwork together. Yeah.
Tammy, I have a question.
Go ahead, Leo.
Part of my job is planning, and when I refer to planning, I refer to financial planning. When you refer at planning, you're referring to planning for a possible separation. When is the ideal time to do so? I heard you say before, before you move into that house. But what's usually your advice on this? Because I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this are like, well, I've already moved into the house. What do I do now?
Well, you're not prevented from coming up with a cohabitation agreement or a postnuptial agreement, any kind of contract. As I said, your imagination is really the limits to how you want to structure it. And again, back to large estates, often that's where you're not planning for a divorce, you're structuring a family trust so that you may have been together for 25 years and you actually like each other and you want to plan what's going to happen if somebody dies, as kids are getting married. That same kind of approach on disclosure, knowing what you have, what's the best tax route to take, and what type of agreement you need. Family trust, separation agreement, cohabitation agreement, independent legal, full disclosure are the two criteria for all of them.
Cool. So it's no matter how young the relationship is, and I've run into this quite a bit actually. I mean, when we're younger, children tend to, we'll call them children, but they're in their 20s. And they tend to just freely move in. Or I've run into situations where, they're 50 and they just move into their homes. Okay. No agreement, nothing. Okay. This is an interesting city. You'd be surprised. It all has blockbuster movie ideas with these relationships. Okay. And you touched on something earlier. Here's a scenario. Okay. You meet this charming man. He has a great story. He's very lovable. Everybody in the group likes him. Okay. And you met him at a social thing and he seemed Yeah, I love this situation. This is scary. Okay. But you make the assumption that he's friends of all the other people in the room because he's that lovable, right? And friendly and social. So you start to date, but within a month, he moves in with you into your beautiful clear title home. And he has a story of, well, he's in the middle of a divorce and his assets aren't whatever. Okay. And you begin to lend him money. Okay. So you talked about this. So checks continue to be, right? Because now we're madly in love with the person, but he's siphoning money that you think you'll get back when it's settled. Within 6 months, your $500,000 is gone, and one day he doesn't come back. Okay. So, back to when is the right time? I think we always have to think the right time is in the beginning, and you really need to know what you're doing. That's an extreme situation, okay?
Mhm.
And that's one that's more mature that you think would know better, but these things happen. But young people need to also, I believe, think about their living relationship, and they need a cohabitation agreement. And I'm delighted that you brought up that things change. So if I can take you back to January, right, when things have changed, people are shocked at when I convey that to them. But can I get you to expand on that a little bit? And Leo, you're a very young man too, and a lot of your clients are young and in medium and older. And so, the whole idea about all of this is really sharing information, even from between the mortgage, right? We talked about wills and estates and all of this. So for me, every time, someone in a position like yours, Leo, as an investment specialist, right, where I'm trying to encourage people to always just ask that one little question, right? Now that we're making this investment, right? Remember, we talked about people refinancing, their homes aren't maybe appreciating, taking $100,000, investing it with Leo. So at least you have, in 10 years, it potentially could be double, right?
Yeah.
So at least you have those things. But that's a new change now. So it triggers, for example, a will, right? And it's a good time. A lot of people don't revisit that. And then it's also a chance to say, okay, well, you're not married, but are you living with someone, right? So, but I think what I heard you just say, the best time is before you start the relationship, like to decide to move in together. And then failing that, you can still do it, even if it's 6 months or 6 years down the road. It's a good time, correct? Is that what I'm hearing you say, Tammy?
Oh, you're right on point on that one. And the other thing is, remember that people go through good times and bad times within their relationship. And if they've gotten through a bad time and they just want the certainty that if we get to this point again, we know what we're going to do. That gives people a really good sense of security, because they're not saying, I'm living in this relationship, but I'm really scared of what's on the other side of the fence. So one of the more common times for let's say a 10-year marriage, like not a 1-year marriage, but 10 years, there've been some problems. They've done the refinancing, the gambling, or like when VLTs came out, that was a big surge. People had not been exposed to VLTs before, and there was this surge of refinancing just to deal with gambling issues.
Very, very, very scary.
Yeah. It was, and it wasn't just one file. It was like there was a surge of refinancing that came in to deal with that. Anyhow, I digress. The idea was that if this happens again, I don't want to lose the marriage, but what is the protection if we end up back in this position? Well, that might be a cohabitation agreement, a separation agreement, a post-nup that addresses that client's concerns and needs. It might be that you do put the house in one person's name at that point if they're scared that the credit cards are going to end up on title, So when I say what is the right time, before you get into it, and people are actually pretty open and generous when they like each other. So when it's fill out the form of everything you have, and here's the consent form to do just a general background type check, they're good. As soon as Mr. Charming was asked to, here's a consent so we can just, check what your assets really look like, he probably wouldn't have moved in.
Yeah, exactly. See, so you can still date, but so like January, explain, you can still date, right? January, what were some of the changes when it comes to, I mean, we're not talking people get married, you're living together, right? So if you don't mind, this year, it was January, it came into effect. Or was it last year? I thought it was last year.
Oh, it doesn't matter if you're married or not married. That was this year. That was this year that marriages and non-marriages were treated the same as far as property rights. Right. And of course, children have always been treated the same. If you're a child born of a non-married couple or a married couple, you're still a child that is entitled to support by both parents and is entitled to be in contact with both parents.
Right. So is there any truth to the following? Okay, in as far as interpretation. The example would be as follows. Leo has a home and Leo's living somewhere else. And this young lady has a home and she's living somewhere else. But they are in a long-term, I will use the word monogamous relationship. Leo often stays over at her house and vice versa. Okay. And so we are living in, it looks almost like a matrimonial. I believe it is because it's monogamous. So tell me about that, because there are a lot of people out in the real world that think they're not living together. And mine is mine and yours is yours. And yeah.
Then get all your lawyers and do the agreement that says mine is mine, it's yours is yours. Because if you don't, then it's not just monogamy or children. If you have children together, you're going to be likely thought of as a married couple.
Right.
But the criteria then becomes, have you formed a joint family venture? And that is, were there expectations of a long-term dependency? Were you on life insurance policies? Did you keep track of, I spent this on your holiday, give me some money? Did that happen? But if there was no intentional separation, you're going to be looking at people's conduct, what they had done before, to try to figure out if there was a joint family venture formed. And obviously, when one person says, yes, we were, and one says, no, we weren't, there isn't a meeting of the minds. So you end up trying to look at the past through today's glasses, which I think is a bit unfortunate. Spend a little bit of money. And I think we're sort of past romance when you ask for an agreement that is protective in nature.
I know. And I think we have to probably, things are far different now than they used to be. And I think we have to work towards dispelling this idea, because you want to establish in the beginning a situation doesn't mean that we don't love each other. It's just in case. It's like having life insurance. It's like having, when you think about it, it makes sense. But sometimes one person will say, well, I'm not signing that. Obviously, you're not in love with me, or you don't love me, right? You don't trust me.
Well, then I'd say hit the road, because if you're going to hit that, we're so not in the same space. You're not going to make it 30 years from a philosophical perspective, right? Because if you say, I don't want to lose my grandma's inheritance, even if I pull that 100 grand from Grammy into a boat or something where it becomes a depreciating asset, that there's some balance, less worry.
True.
So, and again, when people come into a relationship with an equal amount of education and equal employment opportunities, equal assets, they're a little bit more open to that than when there's a disparity between them. And sometimes it is age differences, and often those agreements will say, for every year that we're together, this is what is set aside, so that, again, if you're in a miserable relationship, you have the security of knowing what it looks like if you leave. for both parties.
True. So just to clarify that question I had about the change in January.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sally.
No, that's okay. And because I want to clarify it in English. Okay. So, and we're, as I said, we're a long-term dating relationship, and we each have our own residences and our own portfolios and whatever. So you called it a joint family venture. Are you are you referring to this, one-on-one relationship? I use the word monogamous, but Leo isn't dating 10 other women. Sorry, Leo.
No, but he also
so can it be considered as a matrimonial relationship? As you say, you went traveling, you've done this, you've been together for a few years, and it started out you're both in love. Are the assets in the absence of a cohabitation agreement, are the assets that grew from the time you started dating up for grabs? Sorry.
Well, they are up for grabs. Again, think of that agreement as both a shield and a sword. So if you have to say, oh, you can't come after grandma's money, that because our agreement says you're going to leave any increase in value of the house alone. Or if you say, this agreement says that you're going to help me financially if our relationship ends. So you can use an agreement either way. But if you don't agree that you are in that relationship, then the court is going to be looking at what your old behavior was.
Yeah.
Right. So joint family venture, like I said, life insurance policies named on an RSP, put on a pension. This isn't necessarily stuff you needed to spend money on, but it's that indication that there was a joint commitment of some sort. And
even if
a judge will be asked to make that decision.
But even if one party didn't contribute to all the trips,
doesn't matter. Remember earlier we talked about it doesn't matter if you wanted it, who paid for it, whose name it's in. If it came about during the relationship, the equity is equal.
Okay, so you move forward. Leo and I are dating for 3 years now. Watch this, Leo. Okay, and all of a sudden, I remember he's got his own house. I got my own house. Got my own thing going on. Right? We just meet for dinners and go to movies, and which you can't do now. But, and then Leo wins $10 million in the lottery. And we've been together a long time, but all of a sudden now Leo, I don't know, he decides that we're breaking up.
Okay, so I'm going to play the judge.
Lawyer. Just kidding.
So again, I'd say, what was your joint family venture? Did you both go on Fridays on date night where you stopped by the 7-Eleven and you bought your lottery tickets together and you planned on what you would both do together with your lottery winnings and you both agreed you were going to give some to the SPCA? Was this a joint venture?
Money, Leo paid everything.
Yeah, but if that process of playing the lottery was a joint venture in your actions, then there's maybe an argument. Again, I don't do it because the cases are a little bit all over the place because each case is looked at on the behavior of those two people. So.
So Leo, there's another piece of paper we have to include in this financial planning moving forward. You see this? So, I think, Tammy, I kind of knew that, okay? That's why I bring it up, because people are just really shocked when they hear how the law will interpret all of this. So to avoid hardship, because when I see the hardship is moving forward, if people decide to break up, then, and all of a sudden someone makes a claim against, and we've had this situation too, right? The girl's living with you, you paid for her education and whatever, but her name isn't on title and you get it, right? She could, or the guy, sorry, Leo, it works both ways.
Yeah, for sure, it happens. I've seen a lot of cases of financial abuse coming from from that, and it's
We
pretty
probably
sad.
hear more catfishing by men against women than the other way around. There's
Yes.
there's more charming men that show up than
Yes. So far for me, that's what I've heard. I don't know about Leonardo, right?
I don't have enough of a sizable pool, but I would say from the pool that I have, I agree with Tammy's comment. It seems to be that there's a lot more of that going on, and it seems to be that the man is on fault.
Yeah, and I think it's a crime. I don't know how harsh, if they are ever caught and whatever. Probably nothing happens to these people, but Tammy, that, for me, it always, and I've always believed that when children or young people or old people decide to move in together, this cohabitation agreement word has always been part of my vocabulary. So I've been kind of blessed to be around lawyers, and you see so many situations, you're selling, it's about for me, it's not just the house, it's really about people's relationships. And I'm not sure how come I get away with asking the questions, but I seem to get away with it. Go, oh, wow, isn't that exciting? You guys are moving in together. You know how many times I've said that? Oh. And depending on whose house whose is moving into, I go, oh, so then, oh, you must have executed a cohab agreement, right? What's that? And I always they go, what's that? Okay. So, that just outlines how you guys will live together and moving forward. And when you get married, then you'll sign a prenup, something like that. Oh, do we have to do that? Well,
well, when you're going through a mortgage and you're explaining that they're jointly responsible for this mortgage or separately responsible for the mortgage, you're going through the same principles of what happens if you break up and the bank wants to sue the husband alone instead of the husband and the wife, or the wife alone, not the husband and the wife. So a good explanation on a mortgage is 50% of the explanation on what your agreement says. It's how the relationship, used as a sword or a shield, how that agreement can help your relationship. Not good.
I've taken a lot of this has been, Tammy, I've learned so much from you today. And one of the things that I've learned is to implement those questions into the questionnaire that I use somehow. Because I always ask people if they have a will, and that's super important. But there are other things to be cognizant of, and I think my customers need to hear it before they make these big decisions, or even if they made them already. The other thing is that like the lottery example, you might start a relationship, you might have similar salaries, but all of a sudden something happens that throws off the net worth balance in favor of one person or another, and it might not be through behavior. And how do we address that? That can change a lot of dynamics in a relationship, especially if it was going through a rough patch.
So one of the things I always hope to do by being here every day is connecting people with like-minded people and people that are so focused on helping their friends and their clients. And Leo, I'm so glad that you're here and you met Tammy, because it really is all interconnected. And it's always tragic. I know, Tammy, be prepared. Your phone's going to ring a lot. My phone's been ringing, and it's about houses, and people are considering, separating and doing these things. And it's very, it's the part of my, industry that's, for me, is sad when people decide to do this, especially when there are children involved. And I'm always trying to encourage people to be reasonable and be honest and open. I mean, I've run into lots of situations in my 40 years being here. You've been here 30, that where people are not even honest and straightforward. They're hiding things so many times. It's sad. And eventually people find things, right? Because I mean, this is a conversation. You could have a daily episode on and all by yourself. because there are forensic accountants that that can find things. Leo, you're an investment man. Money is your big thing. You know that money leaves a trace and a footprint. You can't hide it. Eventually, it comes back to a source. And over the course of my real estate experience, even with real estate, people have tried to hide the real estate. And if you keep pulling the title, Tammy, and I remember pulling the title on a piece of land 6 times, going backwards, you find the person. You can't hide behind corporations and corporations and corporations. Eventually, the way the system is structured, there has to be actually a human name behind it, yes or no. So unless you actually, the word fraudulent preference is another subject someday.
Yes.
And we can talk about that, right? So in the end, for me, it's, I don't know. I hope COVID has taught people that, there's more things that are valuable than it's money, okay? All the money can't replace all the people that we've lost through this COVID crisis. And I think that before we're out of it, that every one of us will know somebody who had someone that was affected by it. It's happened to me already a dozen times. And it's pretty scary thing. So hopefully we can, resign ourselves to understanding what's really important, and let's stop fighting. Tammy, I know you're very good at this, and I know your preference is that people are honest and open with everything and be real and settle it and go on, especially if they've tried and they don't want to be together. Okay. Right. So, and then Leo can take whatever it is that's separated and let it grow again. But it is destructive. Waiting 18 months for a court date to let the judge decide when we already know the outcome. You just finished saying the judge will, in the end, say, sell it. Done. Or do you sell it now? And that isn't what you were hoping, correct? Most people?
Well, we're in a system, a divorce is a federal piece of legislation, and it's a no-fault system. You can be the best spouse, the worst spouse. At the end of the day, you're going to be unmarried, but there's no fault in getting a divorce. And some people really want to have fault brought back in to somebody to tell them that you're a bad husband or bad wife, and that's not going to happen. And the other thing is, we're in a community property provincial legislation on how to divide property, which is like the business aspect of getting a divorce. So,
and so it's basically cut and dry, I think, right? Is what you're saying. There's no fault.
It's cut and dry if you want to get it done, which is sort of taking us right back to what we started with, which is encouraging people to spend less energy and less time and less money fighting and try to get to that hope and new normal and get it done.
You know what, from my experience, I think especially if people are not totally honest, and some people are deceptive, the shorter time that you do things, probably maybe better, and understanding where all the money is coming from. For example, if Leo is sitting on $1 million of their assets and it's generating an income, I don't know, maybe you come to terms and you split that income every month and carry on your merry way, right? Leave that $1 million in place. I don't know. So there's lots of things to consider. So Leo, Tammy, this is a pretty serious subject, and you and I both know that the last 2 months, there are lots of couples that have had to come to, come to terms with being able to live together 24/7. And I'm always encouraging people to, try to go back and remember why you fell in love if you have kids and these sorts of things. But if it totally isn't working, then I get it. So Leo, where should all this money go? What happened in the last week in the stock market and with investments?
Well, the last week of the stock market has been, I hate to say it this way, but more of the usual. So we've had, we ended up last week kind of with slowed down gains. Then we started, Monday was a holiday here in Canada, but it wasn't in most parts of the world. We had a rally on, I don't want to call it a rally, that's a big word to use for what we're going through. But we had a positive day, Monday. This is all mostly centered around the news of opening up due to COVID, some reports of earnings that are solid for a lot of companies in the stock market still, or the ones that represent a large worth of the stock market. And then the news around controlling slowing down of cases or possible vaccines or vaccines being tested. All of this stuff is going to have a positive effect on the market in general. So we're moving this week insofar with that positive, that great Monday. Tuesday was a little bit of a slowdown, and then we're still posting good numbers for the rest of the week. Yeah, it is. Now, I mean, as I say this statement, I say it more as an academic pondering is, as far as the market goes, maybe there is the opinion out there that maybe the market has already priced in the recovery when it happens for the most part. So what that means is that, we have a Dow Jones index of 24,000. We started the year off in 29,000. Yeah, that's a drop, but that's not the end of the world, especially when investors, private investors, or mere mortals like you and I might just be invested in portfolios that are of more manageable risk than that. So those portfolios might actually be recovering quite healthily. There's interesting to you. I was looking up some information, and some reports in the U.S. are stating that that new housing starts are positive. There's growth in new housing starts in the U.S. And again, an academic pondering might be, well, people who have been living in 750 square foot apartments somewhere that moved in together 3 years ago now are starting to look at homes that are a bit more, that might meet their needs a little bit better.
Need a yard, get out, yeah, instead of being stacked.
Yeah, that's right. But all in all, the reality here is that, for whether it is a new housing start or not, the theme overall is planning. So, I just give you, it's a stupid example, but it's a valid one. I'm looking for an air compressor to do some things in the garage. I spent 2 hours between, maybe more. Who am I kidding? Maybe 3, looking at air compressors, right? Looking up at reviews, asking my friends who have owned some. I've spent 3 hours looking at a thing that's probably going to cost $300. And how often do people do that or plan for a vacation when they could spend a comparable amount of time, maybe more, but this is a lot more important, planning for their financial plan, or something like a separation. And these are just a few extra hours from what I spent looking at an air compressor, and this will save you a lot of headache, of anxiety, and possibly either make you money or save you a ton of money. So make you money here, save you a ton of money down there.
Well, I mean, our focus has been, I think it has to come back to education. And I'm not a big one to legislate things, but when you look at how the courts are clogged with family law issues, I don't know. Some days I think if I was running the place, it would all be, it's cut and dried. Sorry, right? Before you enter, it sort of reminds me, a lot of churches had that mandatory counseling before you actually walk down the aisle. So mandatory counseling in order to live a happy, beautiful life, because I'm always saddened by all the energy that in the end people spend, right? And, Tammy's been married a long time, and she knows what it takes to have a long-term relationship, right? And Leo, I think you're in a relationship, so congratulations. Sorry, all you women that are watching Leo every week. I'm sorry. Leo's in a relationship. I know we've kind of professed that he's looking kind of single, but and I've been in a long-term relationship, so it's a garden. You have to water it every day. But I think that knowing where things are at is so important. And I would hate to see it in the end because it's clogging up the courts, Tammy, from here to kingdom come. And you reminded us that it's a federal law, and it's just really a crime, the destruction and children that are used to barter situations. I think it's, my parents were divorced. I never forgot what happened, but it was a system where back in those days, it's whoever could feed 5 children is the one that got to take care of them, period. That was it.
Yeah, I could do a whole other show on just kids. That's
exactly.
Sure.
So, but I want to thank you both. Leo, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for the update on the market. And I still believe, and I am encouraging people to understand. I mean, you have to take control a little bit of your future, but to engage the help of people like Leonardo and Tammy Cameron, right? If you want to have an enjoyable next 5 or 10 years, just take the time. And Leo, 3 hours on an air compressor, I think it'll only take about an hour with you, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that's a lot better than a compressor.
And with that, probably less than 15 minutes, because she's going to go, do you have an agreement? No. Then you need one now. Right, Tammy? Anyway,
well, so get your ducks in a line. If you have kids, take that parenting after separation. Mm-hmm. List your assets, list your liabilities. Values are what they are today, not what they were in January, not what we think they're going to be. Good.
Right now, right? So that's the takeaway today. Take the time, be honest about the assets and liabilities. Mm-hmm. I know one party might be shocked when the other one just has debts. That's another subject. That's happened. Now what do you do, right? Okay. Well, thank you both so much for being here today, Leonardo and Tammy. And you can always call Leo. He's available, and Leo's number is on the screen. No, wrong number?
No, mobile, I said.
Oh, mobile. 780-782-0288. And Tammy Cameron, you've always been responsive to clients. I know that your law firm, you not just do family law, you run a very buoyant real estate practice, litigation, wills, trusts, the whole kit and caboodle. And after 30 years, I know for a fact that you know what you're doing.
Well, thanks. It's nice to see you. Okay.
Thank you. We'll see you both. Okay. Thanks, Leo. Thank you.
Take care.
And we'll chat again soon. Okay. Hang on one second. I need to. Okay. So thank you all for joining us today. And tomorrow, be here when we are here at 1 o'clock. And we're going to be talking to Lena Haley, and she's with Kalo, and Kalo is an interesting organization. They have a fundraiser, a virtual fundraiser coming up, and their focus is striving to help families move forward, single moms and their children. So I look forward to seeing you guys here, and our dear friend Terrell Edwards will be dropping by. It's Friday. It's Fun Friday. Thank you so much. Enjoy this beautiful day. And I will see you tomorrow live. Thank you. Bye for now.